The champagne flute hit the table with a crystal chime that cut through the restaurant's ambient chatter like a blade. My wife Elise stood up, her perfectly manicured fingers gripping a manila envelope, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced to our anniversary dinner table, her voice carrying that executive confidence she'd perfected in her HR director role. "I have an announcement. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories." I sat there, fork halfway to my mouth, watching my wife of 8 years transform into someone I barely recognized. Around the table sat our closest friends, or who I'd thought were our friends. Sam Pruitt, Elise's college roommate and current social media influencer, was practically vibrating with excitement. Holly Martinez, our neighbor, had her phone out, ready to capture whatever moment was about to unfold. Joanna Walsh, Elise's work colleague, wore that predatory smile I'd seen her use during corporate layoffs. And then there was Trent Bozeman. Trent owned the largest car dealership in our mid-sized Connecticut town, all flash and fake charm. He'd been sniffing around Elise for months, showing up at our barbecues, our dinner parties, always with some excuse about business opportunities or networking. The guy looked like he'd stepped out of a cologne advertisement, all perfectly styled hair and expensive suits that couldn't hide the fact that he was fundamentally hollow inside. "Grant," Elise said, turning those green eyes on me with theatrical sympathy, "we need to talk about our future." The envelope landed in front of me with a soft thud. Divorce papers. The words "Irreconcilable Differences" stared up at me in bold legal font. "You've got to be kidding me," I muttered. But even as I said it, I could see this wasn't a joke. This was a performance, carefully orchestrated and perfectly timed. "I know this is sudden," Elise continued, her voice dripping with fake concern. "But I've found someone who truly understands my ambitions, someone who can give me the life I deserve." Trent reached over and took her hand, his Rolex catching the restaurant's dim lighting. "Elise deserves a real man," he said, his voice carrying that particular brand of arrogance that comes from never having been truly challenged. "Someone who can match her drive and sophistication." The table erupted in supportive murmurs and congratulations. Sam raised her glass. "To Elise, for finally choosing happiness." Holly nodded enthusiastically. "You deserve so much better, honey." Joanna added her voice to the chorus. "It's about time you put yourself first." I looked around the table at these people I'd considered friends, people I'd invited into my home, people I'd helped through divorces, job losses, family crises. Now they were celebrating the destruction of my marriage like it was New Year's Eve. "Well," I said, setting down my fork and picking up the papers, "this is certainly something." I flipped through the documents, noting the details with the careful attention I'd learned from 20 years in the construction business. You don't survive in contracting without reading the fine print, without understanding exactly what you're signing. "The house goes to Elise," I read aloud, "along with the cars, the savings accounts, and my business assets." I looked up at my wife, who was practically glowing with triumph. "Very thorough." "My lawyer says it's all perfectly legal," she said, her chin lifted in defiance. "Connecticut is an equitable distribution state. I'm entitled to half of everything we've built together." "Half," I repeated thoughtfully. "Interesting interpretation." Trent leaned forward, his chest puffed out like a peacock. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be, Grant. Elise has moved on. You should too." The condescension in his voice was thick enough to cut with a knife. Here was a man who'd never built anything with his own hands, never worked a 16-hour day to meet a deadline, never sacrificed anything for anyone else. And he was telling me how to handle my life. "You know what?" I said, reaching into my jacket pocket. "You're absolutely right. This should be simple." I pulled out a pen, My lucky Mont Blanc that Elise had given me for our 5th anniversary, back when she still pretended to care about sentimental gestures. The irony wasn't lost on me. Before I sign, though, I continued, I want to make sure everyone understands exactly what's happening here. I stood up, matching Elise's theatrical energy with some of my own. My beautiful wife is divorcing me for a car salesman who promises her a better life. My closest friends are here to celebrate this momentous occasion. And I'm supposed to just roll over and accept it all with a smile. That's right, Sam said, raising her glass again. No hard feelings, right, Grant? We can all still be friends. The laughter that escaped me was genuine, if a little dark. Friends, right. I signed the papers with deliberate strokes, making sure each letter was perfectly formed. When I finished, I set the pen down and looked around the table one more time. There, I said. All done. Congratulations to the happy couple. Elise practically snatched the papers from the table, clutching them to her chest like a trophy. Thank you for being mature about this, Grant. I know it's not easy, but… Actually, I interrupted, reaching into my other jacket pocket. I have a little announcement of my own. I pulled out my own manila envelope and handed it to Mr. Landry, the restaurant manager, who'd been hovering nearby with obvious discomfort. He was a good man, had been running this place for 15 years, and I'd done the renovation work on his kitchen 2 years ago. Ladies and gentlemen, I said, borrowing Elise's theatrical tone, tonight's celebration dinner is on the house. Well, not exactly on the house. It's on Mrs. Griffin. Elise's triumphant smile faltered. What do you mean? I mean, I said, settling back into my chair, that this entire evening, the private dining room, the champagne, the prime rib, all of it, is being charged to your personal credit card, the one linked to the account that, as of this afternoon, contains exactly $47.32. The color drained from her face. That's impossible. I have over $15,000 in that account. Had, I corrected gently. Past tense. You see, when you had your lawyer draw up those divorce papers, you made a critical error. You assumed that everything we owned was jointly held. But the truth is, my dear wife, almost nothing in our life together was ever in your name. I pulled out my phone and began scrolling through documents. The house? Purchased by Griffin Construction LLC 3 years before we met, then improved and expanded using company funds. Technically, you've been living in a corporate property. Elise's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. But I live there. It's my home. Was your home, I corrected. The cars? Both leased through the company? The savings account you mentioned? That's a corporate account. You have signature privileges, but the money belongs to Griffin Construction. Trent's face was turning an interesting shade of red. You can't just… Actually, I can, I said, enjoying myself more than I probably should have. You see, Trent, when you've been in business as long as I have, you learn to protect your assets. Everything valuable is held in trust by the company. Everything personal is… well, let's just say it's not worth fighting over. I turned back to Elise, who was frantically digging through her purse for her credit cards. Oh, and honey? Those cards are all company cards. I canceled them about an hour ago. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the surrounding tables had gone quiet, sensing the drama unfolding in our little corner of the restaurant. This is illegal, Elise hissed. You can't just cut me off without warning. Actually, I can, I said, pulling out another document. Remember that prenup you insisted we sign? The one your lawyer drafted to protect your future earnings potential? Well, it turns out it protects my assets too, especially when there's evidence of adultery. I slid a photograph across the table. It showed Elise and Trent in a rather compromising position outside his dealership last week. Mickey, my foreman, had quite the eye for photography. You had me followed? Elise's voice was barely a whisper. I had my property protected, I corrected. When expensive tools started disappearing from job sites, I installed security cameras. Imagine my surprise when I discovered my wife was using company vehicles to visit her boyfriend. Trent tried to salvage the situation. "Look, Grant, maybe we can work something out." "Oh, we already have," I said cheerfully. "You see, Trent, your dealership has been struggling lately. Cash flow problems, supplier issues, that sort of thing. So when you came to me last month asking for a construction loan to expand your service department, I was happy to help." His face went white. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that as of 5 o'clock today, Griffin Construction LLC owns 60% of Bozeman Motors. Congratulations, you're my business partner now." The envelope I handed him contained the loan documents he'd signed, along with the default notice that had been triggered when he'd missed last week's payment. A payment that had been deliberately scheduled during his romantic getaway with my wife. "This is insane," Sam said, finally finding her voice. "You can't just destroy people's lives because you're bitter." I turned to her with genuine interest. "Bitter? Sam, I'm not bitter at all. In fact, I'm grateful. This evening has been incredibly educational." I pulled out my phone again and opened the group chat that the ladies had been so actively using for the past 3 months. "For instance, I learned that you've been calling me Dead Weight Dave behind my back. That Holly here has been telling everyone I'm probably gay because I don't make enough money to satisfy my wife. And that Joanna has been spreading rumors about my business being in financial trouble." The 3 women exchanged panicked glances. They'd forgotten that Elise had added me to their chat months ago, back when they were planning surprise parties and coordinating dinner dates. "I also learned," I continued, scrolling through screenshots, "that Sam has been embezzling from her husband's medical practice to fund her lifestyle blog, that Holly has been having an affair with her personal trainer, and that Joanna has been selling confidential employee information to competing companies." The silence was now absolute. Even the waitstaff had stopped pretending not to listen. "Now," I said, standing up and straightening my jacket, "I could be vindictive about all this. I could send these screenshots to your respective spouses and employers. I could make sure everyone in town knows exactly what kind of people you really are." I paused, letting the weight of that threat sink in. But I'm not going to do that. Because I'm not the villain in this story. I'm just a guy who built a good life, loved his wife, and trusted his friends. The fact that you all decided to betray that trust says more about you than it does about me. I reached into my wallet and pulled out a $20 bill, placing it on the table. "That should cover my coffee. The rest of the bill is, as I mentioned, Mrs. Griffin's responsibility." Elise was now openly crying, her perfect makeup running in dark streaks down her cheeks. "Grant, please, we can work this out. I made a mistake." "Yes, you did," I agreed. "You made several mistakes. You underestimated me. You overestimated him." I nodded toward Trent, who was still staring at the loan documents in shock. "And you forgot that the man who built everything you wanted to take away might just be smart enough to protect it." I walked toward the exit, then turned back for one final observation. "Oh, and Elise, that job offer Trent promised you at his dealership, I'm afraid that's no longer available. Budget cuts, you understand. As the majority owner, I have to make some tough decisions." The last thing I heard as I walked out was the sound of my wife screaming my name, her voice echoing through the restaurant like a banshee's wail. Outside in the parking lot, I took a deep breath of the cool Connecticut evening air. My phone was already buzzing with frantic calls and text messages, but I ignored them all. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new complications, new battles to fight. But tonight I was going to go home to my house, and enjoy the peace and quiet. The next morning arrived with all the subtlety of a demolition crew. I was sitting at my kitchen table, enjoying what had to be the best cup of coffee I'd had in months, when the doorbell started ringing like someone was trying to send Morse code. Through the front window, I could see Elise's BMW in my driveway. Correction, the BMW that used to be available for her use. As of yesterday evening, it was just another company asset. I took my time answering the door, stopping to admire the family photos lining the hallway. Funny how different they looked now. All those smiling faces at birthday parties, anniversaries, holidays. Had any of it been real, or was I just the only one who wasn't acting? "Grant!" Elise pushed past me the moment I opened the door, her designer heels clicking against the hardwood floors I'd installed myself 3 years ago. "We need to talk." She looked like she'd slept in her car, which, given the circumstances, she might have. Her usually perfect hair was disheveled, her makeup was smeared, and she was wearing the same dress from last night. "Good morning to you, too," I said, closing the door behind her. "Coffee?" "Don't you dare act casual with me," she snapped, whirling around to face me. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" I considered the question seriously. "Well, let's see. I protected my business assets, exercised my legal rights under our prenuptial agreement, and declined to subsidize your adultery. Did I miss anything?" "You ruined everything." Her voice cracked, and for a moment I saw a glimpse of the woman I'd fallen in love with all those years ago. Vulnerable, scared, human. Then the mask slipped back into place. "This is my house, too. These are my things." "Actually," I said, walking back toward the kitchen, "they're not." I'd spent most of the night going through paperwork, and the picture was even clearer in the harsh light of morning. Elise had been living in a fantasy, assuming that marriage automatically meant shared ownership of everything. But I'd learned early in my construction career to keep business and personal finances separate. Every major purchase, every investment, every asset that mattered was held by Griffin Construction, LLC. "The house was purchased by my company," I explained, pouring myself another cup of coffee. "You never contributed to the down payment, the mortgage payments, or the renovations. Legally, you've been a guest here." "A guest?" Her voice rose to a pitch that probably had dogs howling 3 blocks away. "I've lived here for 8 years. Rent-free," I pointed out. Which was generous of me, considering. She stared at me like I'd grown a second head. "Considering what?" "Considering that you've been planning this divorce for at least 6 months, I said, settling back into my chair. "The lawyer consultations, the asset searches, the credit checks. Did you really think I wouldn't notice the paper trail?" The truth was, I'd hired a private investigator 3 months ago, when Elise's behavior started changing. Not because I suspected an affair. I'd been genuinely worried about her. She'd been working late, taking mysterious phone calls, acting distracted and secretive. I'd thought maybe she was planning a surprise for our anniversary, or dealing with some kind of family crisis she didn't want to burden me with. The investigator's report had been illuminating. Elise hadn't been planning a surprise party. She'd been planning my destruction. "You had no right," she said, but there was less conviction in her voice now. "I had every right," I replied calmly. "You want a divorce? Fine. You want to run off with your car salesman? That's your choice, but you don't get to steal my life's work to finance your new adventure." My phone buzzed with a text message. Mickey, my foreman, letting me know that he'd changed the locks on all our job sites and the office building. Standard security procedure when there's been a breach of trust. "Where am I supposed to go?" Elise asked, and for the first time since she'd walked in, she sounded genuinely lost. It was a fair question. In her rush to plan her dramatic exit, she'd apparently never considered the practical realities of actually leaving. She had no money, no credit, no assets, and no job. Trent's offer had evaporated along with his financial stability. "I don't know," I said honestly, "but I'm sure you'll figure something out. You're a resourceful woman." She tried a different approach, softening her voice and moving closer. "Grant, honey, I know I hurt you, but we can fix this. We can go to counseling, work through our problems." "Our problems?" I laughed, and it came out harsher than I'd intended. "Elise, you filed for divorce. You humiliated me in front of our friends. You've been cheating on me for months. What exactly do you think counseling is going to fix?" "I made a mistake," she said, reaching for my hand. I was confused, scared about getting older, worried about our future. Trent just seemed like an upgrade? I pulled my hand away. Like a better model with more features and a higher price tag? Her face flushed red. That's not fair. Fair? I stood up, suddenly tired of the whole conversation. You want to talk about fair? Let's talk about fair. Is it fair that I worked 16-hour days to build a business that could support both of us? Is it fair that I put your name on credit cards and bank accounts, trusting you to be responsible? Is it fair that I included you in every major decision about our life together while you were secretly planning to take half of everything I'd built? You deserve exactly what you contributed. I cut her off, which, according to my accountant, is approximately nothing. That was harsh, but it was also true. Elise made good money in her HR position, but she'd never contributed a dime to our household expenses. Her salary went to clothes, spa treatments, girls' trips, and whatever other luxuries caught her fancy. I'd covered the mortgage, utilities, groceries, insurance, car payments, everything that actually mattered. I contributed to this marriage, she said, her voice shaking with anger. I supported your career, entertained your clients, managed our social life. You attended parties, I corrected. You smiled and made small talk and looked pretty on my arm. That's not a career, Elise. That's a hobby. The slap came fast, cracking across my cheek with enough force to snap my head to the side. For a moment, we both stood frozen, staring at each other in shock. Get out, I said quietly. Grant, get out of my house, now. She opened her mouth to argue, then seemed to think better of it. Without another word, she turned and walked toward the door, her heels echoing through the empty hallway. Oh, and Elise? I called after her. The BMW stays here. It's a company car. The door slammed hard enough to rattle the windows. I stood there for a long moment, my cheek still stinging, listening to the sound of her voice outside as she called someone, probably Trent, to come pick her up. Then I walked back to the kitchen and poured myself another cup of coffee. My phone rang. Mickey. Boss. His gravelly voice came through the speaker. You might want to turn on Channel 8. I found the remote and flipped to the local news station. There was Sam Pruitt, standing outside the restaurant from last night, speaking earnestly into a reporter's microphone. What we witnessed was a clear case of financial abuse, she was saying, her voice full of righteous indignation. This poor woman was trapped in a marriage with a controlling, manipulative man who used his money to isolate her from her friends and family. The reporter, a young woman who looked fresh out of journalism school, nodded sympathetically. And you say Mr. Griffin threatened you and the other dinner guests? Absolutely, Sam replied without missing a beat. He had been stalking us, gathering private information, making threats. We all feared for our safety. I had to admire her creativity. In the span of 12 hours, she'd managed to transform herself from gleeful accomplice to innocent victim. It was almost artistic in its shamelessness. The camera cut to Holly, who was dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. Elise is like a sister to me, she said. To see her treated this way, to watch her husband destroy her life out of spite. It's just heartbreaking. Heartbreaking, I muttered to myself. Right. My phone buzzed with another text, this one from my lawyer, Liam Morrison. Saw the news. Don't talk to reporters. Don't respond to social media. Let me handle this. Good advice. Liam had been handling my legal affairs for 15 years, ever since I'd started Griffin Construction. He was a thin, sharp-featured man who looked like he'd stepped out of a Dickens novel, but he had the instincts of a shark and the ethics of a priest. If anyone could navigate this mess, it was him. Another text, this one from an unknown number. You think you're so smart. We'll see about that. Trent, presumably. I deleted the message without responding. The news segment continued with file footage of my construction sites and office building, while the reporter provided background on successful businessman Grant Griffin and his bitter divorce battle. They made it sound like I was some kind of corporate raider who'd married an innocent small-town girl and then discarded her when she became inconvenient. The truth, as usual, was more complicated than the story. I turned off the TV and walked upstairs to my bedroom, the bedroom I'd shared with Elise for 8 years. Her clothes were still in the closet, her makeup still scattered across the bathroom counter, her books still stacked on the nightstand. It looked like she'd just stepped out for a moment and would be back any minute. But she wouldn't be back. Not really. Even if she somehow managed to worm her way back into this house, the woman I'd married was gone. Maybe she'd never really existed in the first place. I started packing her belongings into boxes, working methodically through drawers and closets. Most of it was expensive. Designer clothes, jewelry, shoes that cost more than most people made in a week. All of it purchased with money she'd never earned. As I worked, I found myself thinking about the early days of our marriage. Elise had been different then, or at least I'd thought she was. She'd seemed genuinely interested in my work, asking questions about construction projects and business decisions. She'd been proud of what we were building together. When had that changed? When had I become just another asset to be managed and eventually liquidated? My phone rang again. This time it was Mrs. Kavanaugh, my 70-year-old neighbor who knew everything that happened within a 6-block radius. "Grant, dear." Her voice was warm with concern. "I saw the news. Are you all right?" "I'm fine, Mrs. C," I said, grateful for at least one genuine human connection. "Just cleaning house." "Literally or figuratively?" I laughed despite myself. "Both." "Good," she said with satisfaction. "That woman never deserved you anyway. Too fancy for her own good, if you ask me." Mrs. Kavanaugh had never liked Elise, though she'd been too polite to say so directly. Now, apparently, the gloves were coming off. "I suppose you heard about the restaurant incident," I said. "Heard about it?" "Honey, my granddaughter was working there last night. She said it was better than anything on television." Of course. In a town this size, everything was connected. By now, half the population probably knew exactly what had happened, regardless of what Sam and Holly were telling the reporters. "Well," I said, "I suppose it'll be something to talk about." "Oh, it already is," Mrs. Kavanaugh assured me. "And most folks are on your side if that matters. Nobody likes a cheater, and nobody likes seeing a hard-working man get taken advantage of." It did matter, more than I wanted to admit. I'd lived in this town for 20 years, built my business here, established relationships with suppliers, clients, and employees. My reputation was worth more than any financial asset. "Thanks, Mrs. C," I said. "I appreciate it." "You just take care of yourself, dear. And if you need anything, a home-cooked meal, someone to talk to, or just a friendly ear, you know where to find me." After she hung up, I continued packing Elise's belongings, but with a lighter heart. Maybe I wasn't as alone in this as I'd thought. By evening, I had everything boxed and ready for pickup. Elise's entire life in our house reduced to a dozen cardboard containers. It seemed like such a small pile for 8 years of marriage. I was just taping up the last box when I heard a car in the driveway. Through the window, I saw Trent's red Corvette, the one car he owned that wasn't financed through his dealership. Elise got out of the passenger seat, followed by Trent himself. This should be interesting. The doorbell rang exactly once before Trent started pounding on the door with his fist. Subtle as always. "Griffin, open up. We need to talk." I took my time walking to the front door, stopping to check my appearance in the hallway mirror. Amazing how calm I looked, considering the circumstances. Maybe this whole experience was agreeing with me. When I opened the door, Trent pushed past me without invitation, his face red with anger and exertion. He'd loosened his tie and rolled up his sleeves, apparently preparing for some kind of physical confrontation. Behind him, Elise looked embarrassed but determined. "You bastard," Trent snarled, getting right up in my face. "You think you can destroy people's lives and just walk away?" I stepped back, not out of fear, but to get a better look at him. Up close, the cracks in his perfect facade were more obvious. His expensive shirt was wrinkled, his usually perfect hair was disheveled, and there were dark circles under his eyes. The stress was getting to him. "I haven't destroyed anything," I said calmly. "I've simply stopped subsidizing your relationship with my wife." "You manipulative bastard," he spat. "You set us up. The loan documents, the payment schedule, all of it was designed to trap me." "Actually," I said, walking toward the living room, "it was designed to help you expand your business. The fact that you defaulted on the first payment isn't my fault." That was technically true. When Trent had approached me about the loan, I'd offered him standard terms: reasonable interest rate, manageable payments, fair collateral requirements. The only unusual aspect was the accelerated default clause, which I'd included because his credit history was shakier than he'd admitted. "You knew I'd missed that payment," Trent accused, following me into the room. "You scheduled it during our trip to Boston." "Your romantic getaway with my wife," I corrected, which, by the way, violated the morality clause in my marriage contract and triggered several interesting legal provisions. Elise finally spoke up. "Grant, please, can't we discuss this like civilized adults?" I turned to look at her, really look at her, for the first time since this whole mess started. She was still beautiful. That hadn't changed. But there was something different about her now, something desperate and calculating that I'd never noticed before. "Civilized adults?" I repeated. "Like the civilized way you served me divorce papers in front of our friends? Or the civilized way you've been stealing from our joint accounts to finance your affair?" "I never stole anything," she protested. "The hotel rooms in Boston, New York, and Hartford," I said, pulling out a folder of credit card statements. "The jewelry you bought for yourself but claimed was a gift from me. The cash withdrawals you made from our business account. Should I go on?" Her face went pale. She'd forgotten about the paper trail, the digital footprints that every transaction leaves behind. In her mind, she'd been clever and discreet. In reality, she'd been sloppy and obvious. "Those were legitimate expenses," she said weakly. "For what? Your job doesn't require travel. You don't have any business interests outside of our marriage. The only legitimate explanation is that you were using our money to cheat on me." Trent stepped between us, puffing out his chest like a rooster defending his territory. "Enough. We're not here to relitigate the past. We're here to discuss the future." "What future?" I asked. "You mean the one where you're my business partner and I control 60% of your dealership?" His jaw clenched. "I want to buy out your stake." "With what money?" I laughed. "Trent, you're broke. Your dealership was hemorrhaging cash before I got involved. That's why you needed the loan in the first place." "I have investors," he said, but there was no conviction in his voice. "You had investors," I corrected. "But funny thing about investors, they don't like uncertainty. When word gets out that you've defaulted on a major loan, that you've lost control of your own business, they tend to get nervous." I'd done my homework. Trent's financial situation was even worse than I'd initially thought. He'd been juggling creditors for months, using new loans to pay off old debts, keeping the whole house of cards standing through sheer force of personality and creative accounting. "You destroyed my reputation," he said, his voice rising. "My customers, my suppliers, everyone thinks I'm finished." "Your reputation destroyed itself," I replied. "I just stopped propping it up." Elise moved closer to Trent, taking his arm in a gesture of support that looked more desperate than romantic. "We'll fight this," she said. "We'll hire lawyers, challenge the loan documents, prove that you manipulated the situation." "With what money?" I asked again. "Elise, you're unemployed and broke. Trent is worse than broke. He's in debt up to his eyeballs. What lawyer is going to take your case on contingency when the facts are this clear-cut?" The silence that followed was telling. They'd been so focused on their grand romance, so convinced that love would conquer all, that they'd never considered the practical realities of their situation. "Besides," I continued, What exactly would you be fighting for? The right to steal my assets? The right to commit adultery without consequences? Good luck finding a judge who's sympathetic to that argument. Trent's hands clenched into fists. For a moment, I thought he might actually take a swing at me. Part of me almost hoped he would. It would make the rest of this so much easier. You think you're so smart, he said, echoing his earlier text message. But you're just a bitter old man who can't accept that his wife found someone better. Better? I looked him up and down, taking in the expensive clothes that couldn't hide his fundamental inadequacy. Trent, you're a used car salesman who's never built anything, never created anything, never contributed anything meaningful to the world. You're a parasite who feeds off other people's success. His face turned an even deeper shade of red. At least I know how to make a woman happy. The implication hung in the air between us like a challenge. I could have responded with anger, with wounded pride, with the kind of masculine posturing that men like Trent understood. Instead, I laughed. Is that what you think this is about? I asked. Jealousy? Wounded ego? Trent, I don't care who my wife sleeps with. I care that she tried to steal my life's work to finance her midlife crisis. I turned to Elise, who was watching our exchange with growing alarm. You want to know the truth? I stopped loving you months ago, maybe years ago. This whole situation has been liberating. That hit her harder than any insult could have. Her face crumpled, and for a moment she looked genuinely hurt rather than just angry. You don't mean that, she whispered. I absolutely mean it, I said, and realized that I did. You've become someone I don't recognize, someone I don't particularly like. This divorce is the best thing that could have happened to both of us. Trent stepped forward again, apparently feeling the need to defend his woman's honor. You bastard! She loved you. She gave you the best years of her life. She gave me 8 years of increasingly expensive demands and decreasing affection, I corrected. She turned our marriage into a business transaction, and now she's upset that I'm better at business than she is. That's not true, Elise protested, but there was no real conviction in her voice. Isn't it? I walked over to my desk and pulled out another folder. Let's see. In the past 2 years, you've spent $47,000 on clothes, $32,000 on spa treatments and beauty procedures, $18,000 on girls' trips, and $26,000 on miscellaneous shopping. That's over $120,000 on yourself, not counting basic living expenses. The numbers hung in the air like an accusation. I'd run the calculations the night before, going through credit card statements and bank records with the same attention to detail I brought to construction estimates. What did you contribute to our household during that same period? I continued. You paid for groceries exactly 4 times. You covered utilities twice. You never paid a mortgage payment, never bought furniture, never contributed to home improvements or maintenance. I worked, she said weakly. You worked at a job that paid you $60,000 a year, I agreed, and you spent every penny of it on yourself while I covered all our actual expenses. Trent tried to salvage the situation. So what? She's your wife. You're supposed to take care of her. I did take care of her, I said. I gave her a beautiful home, financial security, and complete freedom to pursue her interests. In return, she gave me betrayal and divorce papers. I closed the folder and looked at both of them with something approaching pity. You want to know the real tragedy here? I would have given Elise anything she wanted if she'd just been honest with me. If she'd come to me 2 years ago and said she was unhappy, that she wanted something different, we could have worked it out. We could have separated amicably, divided our assets fairly, remained friends. But instead, I continued, she chose to sneak around, to lie, to cheat, to plan my destruction behind my back. She turned our divorce into a war, and now she's upset that she's losing. The truth of that statement seemed to hit Elise like a physical blow. She sank into one of my leather chairs, her perfect composure finally cracking completely. I never meant for it to happen this way, she said, tears streaming down her face. I felt trapped. Like my life was passing me by. Like I was becoming invisible. For the first time in this entire conversation, she sounded genuine. Not calculating, not manipulative, just scared and confused and human. "So you decided to blow everything up instead of talking to me about it," I said, not unkindly. "I tried to talk to you," she protested, "but you were always working, always busy with some project or client or crisis. When was I supposed to fit into your schedule?" That stung because there was some truth to it. I had been working a lot, especially in the past few years as the business grew, but I'd thought I was building something for both of us, creating the financial security that would give us options later in life. "You could have made an appointment," I said dryly. Despite everything, that made her laugh. A short, bitter sound, but genuine. An appointment with my own husband. "It would have been more honest than what you did instead." Trent, who had been listening to this exchange with growing discomfort, finally exploded. "This is bullshit. You're trying to make her feel guilty for falling in love with someone else. People's feelings change, Griffin. That's life." I turned back to him, my patience finally exhausted. "You're right, Trent. Feelings change, but contracts don't. Legal obligations don't. The consequences of our choices don't just disappear because we've decided we want something different." "You're going to destroy both of us over a technicality," he accused. "I'm going to protect what's mine," I corrected. "There's a difference." I walked over to where Elise's boxes were stacked by the front door. "Your belongings are packed and ready to go. I've included everything that was genuinely yours: clothes, jewelry, personal items, gifts from your family." She looked at the small pile of boxes with something approaching despair. "That's it? That's my entire life?" "That's your entire contribution to our marriage," I said bluntly. "Everything else belongs to Griffin Construction LLC, which means it belongs to me." Trent grabbed one of the boxes and headed for the door. "Come on, Elise. We don't need anything from this bastard." But Elise didn't move. She sat in my chair, staring at the boxes like they were evidence of her own failure. "Where are we going to go?" she asked quietly. It was a fair question. With no money, no credit, and no immediate prospects for employment, their options were limited. Trent's apartment was being foreclosed on, another detail my investigator had uncovered. His lifestyle had been as much of an illusion as Elise's. "That's not my problem anymore," I said, and meant it. Trent set down the box and walked back toward me, his fists clenched again. "You cold-hearted bastard. She's your wife." "She's my ex-wife," I corrected. "As of yesterday, remember? Her choice, not mine." "You can't just throw her out on the street." "I'm not throwing her anywhere. I'm simply declining to continue subsidizing her lifestyle now that our marriage is over." He took another step toward me, close enough that I could smell the desperation on him, like cheap cologne. "What if I make you a deal?" "What kind of deal?" "I'll sign over my remaining 40% of the dealership, give you complete ownership. In return, you give Elise a fair settlement and cancel the rest of my debt." I pretended to consider it. "And what would I want with a failing car dealership?" "It's not failing," he protested, but without much conviction. "It just needs better management." "It needs about $2 million and a complete change of business model," I said. "Even if I wanted to get into the car business, which I don't, your dealership would be a terrible investment." "Then what do you want?" he asked desperately. I looked at him for a long moment, then at Elise, who was still sitting motionless in her chair. What did I want? Revenge? Justice? Simply to be left alone? "I want you both to disappear," I said finally. "I want you to take your boxes, get in your car, and drive away. I want you to stop calling me, stop texting me, stop showing up at my house. I want you to accept that your actions have consequences and deal with those consequences like adults." "And if we do that?" Elise asked quietly. "Then I'll consider our business concluded. I won't pursue the money you stole from our joint accounts. I won't press charges for the fraudulent use of company credit cards. I won't sue for alienation of affection or intentional infliction of emotional distress. It was a generous offer, more generous than they deserved, but I was tired of this drama, tired of having my life consumed by their chaos. I wanted to move forward, not spend the next 2 years in court battles. Trent looked like he wanted to argue, but Elise stood up and put a hand on his arm. "Take the deal," she said quietly. "Elise, take the deal, Trent. We've lost. It's over." For the first time since this whole mess started, she sounded like the woman I'd married, practical, realistic, willing to accept hard truths. It was too late to save our marriage, but maybe it wasn't too late to end it with some dignity. Trent looked back and forth between us, clearly wanting to continue the fight, but recognizing that he had no leverage left. Finally, he nodded grudgingly. "Fine, but this isn't over, Griffin." "Yes," I said firmly, "it is." They loaded the boxes into Trent's Corvette in silence. It took 3 trips, and I watched from my front window as they worked. Elise moved like she was sleepwalking, going through the motions without any real awareness of what she was doing. Just before they left, she walked back to my front door one last time. "Grant," she said when I opened it, "I really am sorry. I know you don't believe me, but I am." I looked at her face, searching for signs of manipulation or calculation. Instead, I saw only exhaustion and genuine remorse. "I believe you," I said. "But sorry doesn't fix anything." She nodded, tears starting to flow again. "I know." "For what it's worth," I added, "I hope you figure out what you really want. And I hope you find a way to get it without destroying anyone else's life." "Thank you," she whispered. Then she turned and walked back to Trent's car. I watched them drive away, the red Corvette disappearing around the corner like a bad dream finally ending. I stood in my doorway for a few more minutes, breathing in the cool evening air. The house behind me was quiet, empty, mine. For the first time in months, I felt truly at peace. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. There would be lawyers to deal with, business decisions to make, a life to rebuild. But tonight, I was free. I went back inside and poured myself a glass of the good whiskey, the bottle Elise had always said was too expensive to actually drink. Then I sat in my living room, in my house, surrounded by the life I'd built with my own hands, and allowed myself to smile. 3 weeks later, I was in my office reviewing construction bids when Mickey knocked on my door. My foreman looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, which usually meant he had bad news to deliver. "Boss," he said, settling his bulk into the chair across from my desk, "we got a problem." Mickey O'Brien was 62 years old, built like a fire hydrant, and had been working construction since before I was born. He'd been with Griffin Construction for 15 years, and in all that time, I'd never seen him look this uncomfortable. "What kind of problem?" I asked, setting down the bid documents. "The kind that involves your ex-wife and her boyfriend showing up at the Morrison job site this morning, trying to cause trouble." The Morrison project was our biggest current contract, a luxury housing development on the outskirts of town. We were building 12 custom homes for affluent families moving out from Hartford, and the project represented about 30% of our annual revenue. "What kind of trouble?" I asked, though I had a sinking feeling I already knew. Mickey pulled out his phone and showed me a video. The footage was shaky, obviously shot by one of our workers, but clear enough to see Elise and Trent talking to several of our subcontractors. Even without audio, their body language was aggressive, confrontational. "They're telling anyone who'll listen that you're unstable," Mickey said, "that the company is in financial trouble because of the divorce, that workers might not get paid, that contracts might not be honored." I felt a familiar anger building in my chest, but I kept my voice calm. "How many people did they talk to?" "Maybe a dozen. Most of our guys told them to get lost, but a couple of the newer subcontractors seemed worried, and Mrs. Morrison was there when it happened. That was the real problem. Catherine Morrison was the wife of the developer, and she had very specific ideas about the kind of people she wanted working on her project. If she thought Griffin Construction was involved in some kind of messy personal drama, she might look for reasons to terminate our contract. "Where are they now?" I asked. "Gone. Security escorted them off the property about an hour ago, but boss—" Mickey hesitated, then forged ahead. "This ain't gonna be the end of it. They looked desperate." He was right. I'd given Elise and Trent a chance to disappear quietly, to accept their losses and move on with their lives. Instead, they'd decided to escalate the conflict. That was disappointing, but not entirely surprising. "Get me a meeting with Catherine Morrison," I said. "This afternoon if possible. I want to address any concerns she might have before they turn into real problems." "Already set up," Mickey said with a grin. 2 o'clock at her house. Figured you'd want to get ahead of this." This was why Mickey had been my foreman for 15 years. He anticipated problems and solved them before they became crises. After he left, I called Liam Morrison, no relation to our client, despite the shared name. My lawyer answered on the first ring. "I was wondering when you'd call," he said without preamble. "I've been hearing interesting stories about your ex-wife's new career as a public relations consultant." "She's trying to sabotage my business," I said bluntly. "So I gathered. The question is, what do you want to do about it?" It was a fair question. I could pursue legal remedies, restraining orders, defamation suits, interference with business relations claims. But lawsuits took time and money, and they kept me tied to Elise and Trent indefinitely. I wanted to be done with both of them. "I want to end this permanently," I said. "Define permanently. I want them gone. Out of town, out of my life, out of my business. Whatever it takes." There was a pause while Liam considered the implications of that statement. "Grant, I have to advise you that there are legal limits to—" "I'm not talking about anything illegal," I interrupted. "I'm talking about applying economic pressure until they realize that staying here isn't viable." "Ah," I could hear the smile in his voice. "That I can work with." We spent the next hour developing a strategy. It was complex, ruthless, and entirely legal. By the time we finished, I almost felt sorry for Elise and Trent. Almost. The meeting with Catherine Morrison went better than expected. She was a sharp woman in her 50s who'd made her own fortune in real estate before marrying the developer. She listened to my explanation of the morning's events without interruption, then asked pointed questions about Griffin Construction's financial stability and project timeline. "Mr. Griffin," she said when I'd finished my presentation, "I don't particularly care about your personal life. What I care about is whether you can deliver 12 houses on time and on budget." "I can," I said simply. "Then we don't have a problem. But if your ex-wife shows up at my job site again, I'll have her arrested for trespassing." I liked Catherine Morrison. That evening, I was at home reviewing architectural plans when my doorbell rang. Through the window, I could see a police car in my driveway. This was new. Officer Janet Riley was a 20-year veteran of the local force, a no-nonsense woman who'd dealt with her share of domestic disputes. She looked tired and slightly annoyed. "Evening, Grant," she said when I opened the door. "Sorry to bother you, but I need to ask you a few questions." "About what?" "Your ex-wife filed a complaint this afternoon. She says you've been harassing her, making threats, interfering with her attempts to find employment." I stepped aside to let her in. "That's interesting, considering I haven't spoken to her since she picked up her belongings 3 weeks ago." "That's what I figured," Officer Riley said, settling into my living room. "But I have to follow up on these things. You know how it is." I did know how it was. Domestic disputes were tricky, and police departments erred on the side of caution. Even obviously false accusations had to be investigated. "What specifically is she claiming?" I asked. Officer Riley consulted her notes. "She says you've been calling her employer trying to get her fired. She says you've been following her around town, showing up at places where she's trying to conduct business. She says you threatened to destroy her life if she didn't leave town. Her employer? I raised an eyebrow. Janet, Elise doesn't have an employer. She's been unemployed since the divorce. That's what I thought too. But she gave me a business card from some company called Elite Consulting Services. Says she's their new director of human resources. She handed me the card. It was professionally printed, expensive looking, with Elise's name and a local phone number. The company name was unfamiliar, but the address was interesting. A strip mall office building that I knew had been mostly vacant for months. Did you verify that this company actually exists? I asked. I called the number. Got a receptionist who confirmed that Mrs. Griffin works there. Officer Riley paused, studying my face. But you don't look surprised. I'm not, I said. Janet, I think my ex-wife is running some kind of scam. She's probably set up a fake company to make herself look employable, maybe to support some kind of insurance fraud or loan application. That's a serious accusation. It's a logical explanation. 3 weeks ago, she was broke and unemployed. Now suddenly she has a director-level position at a company nobody's ever heard of. Officer Riley made more notes. I'll look into it. In the meantime, have you had any contact with her since the divorce? None whatsoever. I can prove it if necessary. Phone records, credit card statements, witness testimony. I've been going out of my way to avoid any contact with her. What about the business interference? She says you've been sabotaging her attempts to find work. I considered how much to tell her. Janet, Elise and her boyfriend showed up at one of my construction sites this morning, trying to spread rumors about my company's financial stability. They were escorted off the property by security. That's the only business interference I'm aware of. She's claiming you did it to her, not the other way around. Then she's lying, which, frankly, isn't surprising. Officer Riley closed her notebook and stood up. Grant, I've known you for a long time. I don't think you're harassing your ex-wife, but I have to document this complaint, and I have to advise you to be careful. Sometimes these domestic situations escalate in ways nobody expects. I understand. And Janet? If Elise or Trent show up at any more of my job sites, I'll be filing complaints of my own. After she left, I called Liam and filled him in on the evening's developments. He listened without comment, then asked me to fax him a copy of the business card. Elite Consulting Services, he mused. Never heard of them, which is odd since I know most of the legitimate consulting firms in the area. Can you run a background check? Already on it. I'll have something for you by tomorrow morning. The next morning brought answers, and they were even more interesting than I'd expected. Elite Consulting Services had been incorporated just 2 weeks ago, with Elise listed as president and sole employee. The company had no clients, no revenue, and no business purpose beyond providing Elise with official-looking letterhead. More interesting was the financing. The company's startup costs had been paid with a cashier's check from Trent's personal account, money he'd borrowed against his remaining equity in the car dealership. They're planning something, Liam said when he called with the details. People don't create fake companies just for the business cards. He was right. This felt like the setup for a larger scheme, probably involving insurance claims or loan applications. Elise was smart enough to know that unemployed divorcees don't get approved for credit or apartments, so she'd manufactured an employment history. What do you want to do about it? Liam asked. Nothing for now. Let's see what they're really planning before we make any moves. I didn't have to wait long. That afternoon, Mickey called with an update from the Morrison job site. Boss, we got visitors again. Not your ex-wife this time. Some guy in a suit claiming to be from the state contractors licensing board. That was concerning. The licensing board had the authority to shut down construction projects if they found violations of state regulations. A surprise inspection could cost us weeks of delays and thousands of dollars in fines. What did he want? I asked. Said he was following up on a complaint about unsafe working conditions and unlicensed subcontractors. Spent about 2 hours going through our paperwork and talking to the crew. Find anything? Nope. We're clean. just like always. But he seemed disappointed, like he was expecting to find problems. I had a pretty good idea who had filed that complaint. Did he say who made the original report? Anonymous tip, supposedly. But boss, here's the weird thing. When he was leaving, I saw him talking to that boyfriend of your ex-wife. They were standing by the parking area, having what looked like a real friendly conversation. Interesting. Either Trent had coincidentally run into a state inspector, or the whole thing had been orchestrated. Given everything else that had been happening, I was betting on orchestration. Get me copies of everything the inspector looked at, I said. And Mickey, start documenting everything. Times, dates, who was present, what was said. I have a feeling we're going to need a paper trail. That evening, I decided to do some reconnaissance of my own. Elite Consulting Services was located in a strip mall between a nail salon and a tax preparation office. I drove by around 7 o'clock, when most legitimate businesses would be closed. The office was dark, but there was a light on in the back room. Through the window, I could see Elise and Trent hunched over a desk covered with papers. They looked like they were planning something, and given the events of the past few days, I doubted it was anything good. I parked across the street and called Liam. I need you to file a complaint with the state licensing board, I said. About what? About someone impersonating a state inspector. I think Trent has been pretending to be an official investigator, using fake credentials to harass my subcontractors and gather information about my business operations. That's a felony if you can prove it. I'm working on the proof. In the meantime, I want an official complaint on record. When this all comes out, I want to be the victim, not the perpetrator. The next morning brought the breakthrough I'd been waiting for. Mrs. Kavanaugh called just after 8 o'clock, her voice bubbling with excitement. Grant, dear, you need to know what I heard at the grocery store this morning. Mrs. Kavanaugh's grocery store intelligence network was legendary. She somehow managed to overhear every important conversation in town, usually while pretending to comparison shop for breakfast cereal. What did you hear, Mrs. C? That woman of yours, your ex-wife. She was talking to Betty Henderson from the insurance office. Something about filing a claim for emotional distress and lost wages. Betty Henderson worked for the largest insurance agency in town, handling everything from auto accidents to workers' compensation claims. If Elise was talking to her about emotional distress, she was probably planning to sue me for damages related to the divorce. Did you hear any details? Oh, yes, dear. She's claiming you've been stalking her, threatening her, interfering with her business. Says she's developed anxiety and depression, can't work, can't sleep. Wants to file a claim against your business insurance for intentional infliction of emotional distress. That explained the fake company and the false police report. Elise was building a case, creating a paper trail that would support an insurance claim. The plan was probably to get a settlement from my insurance company, then disappear with the money. It was actually clever, in a criminal sort of way. Insurance companies often settled nuisance claims rather than fight them in court, especially when the amounts involved were relatively small. A claim for $50,000 or $100,000 might get paid without much investigation, but Elise had made one critical error. She'd underestimated my willingness to fight back. Mrs. C, I said, if you happen to run into Betty Henderson again, you might mention that I've been documenting everything: phone records, security footage, witness statements. If someone is planning to file false insurance claims, they should know that I have evidence to disprove their allegations. Oh, I'll be sure to mention that, dear. You know how I worry about insurance fraud. It drives up premiums for everyone. Mrs. Kavanaugh was a treasure. That afternoon, I called a meeting with my insurance agent, my lawyer, and my accountant. We spent 3 hours going through every aspect of my business and personal finances, looking for vulnerabilities and preparing defenses. The good news, my insurance agent said, is that your policy has strong coverage for malicious prosecution and false claims. If someone files a fraudulent lawsuit against you, we'll defend it aggressively. The bad news, Liam added, is that defending these claims takes time and money, even when you win. They're betting that you'll settle rather than fight. "They're betting wrong," I said. By the end of the meeting, we had a comprehensive strategy. Every aspect of Elise and Trent's campaign against me would be documented, investigated, and countered. When they finally made their move, I'd be ready. I didn't have to wait long. The lawsuit was filed the following Monday morning, claiming $200,000 in damages for harassment, stalking, interference with business relations, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The complaint read like a work of fiction. According to Elise's version of events, I was a controlling, abusive husband who had systematically isolated her from friends and family, then launched a campaign of terror when she finally found the courage to leave me. She claimed that I'd been following her around town, making threatening phone calls, and sabotaging her attempts to find employment. She said that my actions had caused her to develop severe anxiety and depression, requiring medical treatment and preventing her from working. The lawsuit was accompanied by a restraining order application, asking the court to prohibit me from coming within 500 feet of Elise or her place of business. It was a comprehensive attack, designed to destroy my reputation and my business, while generating a substantial financial settlement. Under other circumstances, it might have worked. But Elise had forgotten something important. I'd been preparing for this moment for weeks. The restraining order hearing was scheduled for Thursday morning at 9 o'clock. I arrived at the courthouse 30 minutes early, carrying 2 briefcases full of documentation, and accompanied by Liam, who looked like a shark who'd been fasting for a week. Judge Patricia Hendricks was a no-nonsense woman in her 60s who'd been handling domestic relations cases for 20 years. She'd seen every variation of divorce drama imaginable, and her tolerance for nonsense was legendary. Which is to say, she had none. Elise arrived 10 minutes before the hearing, accompanied by a lawyer I didn't recognize. She looked nervous but determined, dressed conservatively in a way that was clearly calculated to win sympathy from the court. Trent was nowhere to be seen, which was interesting. Either he was trying to maintain plausible deniability, or there had been some kind of falling out between them. "Your Honor," Elise's lawyer began when we were called, "my client has been subjected to a campaign of harassment and intimidation by her ex-husband. She fears for her safety and her ability to rebuild her life after their divorce." He presented the court with a folder of evidence, copies of the police report, photographs of me allegedly following Elise around town, documentation of her employment at Elite Consulting Services, and medical records showing treatment for anxiety and depression. It was a compelling presentation, professionally done and emotionally effective. If I hadn't known the truth, I might have been convinced myself. Judge Hendricks reviewed the materials carefully, then turned to Liam. "Counselor, how does your client respond to these allegations?" Liam stood up with the calm confidence of a man holding 4 aces. "Your Honor, my client categorically denies all allegations of harassment or stalking. In fact, we believe this entire proceeding is part of an elaborate fraud scheme designed to extract money from Mr. Griffin and his insurance company." He opened his first briefcase and began laying out documents on the table. "We have phone records showing that Mr. Griffin has made no calls to his ex-wife since their divorce. We have credit card records showing that he has not been to any of the locations where she claims to have been followed. We have security footage from his office building, showing that he has been at work during the times when these alleged incidents supposedly occurred." Judge Hendricks leaned forward with interest. "Go on." "Furthermore, Your Honor, we have evidence that Mrs. Griffin has created a fictitious company called Elite Consulting Services for the sole purpose of supporting her fraudulent claims. The company has no clients, no revenue, and no legitimate business purpose." Liam produced copies of the corporate filings, bank records, and business registration documents. The company was funded with money borrowed by Mrs. Griffin's boyfriend, Mr. Trent Bozeman, against assets that he no longer owns due to his own financial difficulties. Elise's lawyer tried to object, but Judge Hendricks waved him off. "I want to hear this." "We also have evidence," Liam continued, "that Mr. Bozeman has been impersonating a state licensing inspector, using false credentials to harass Mr. Griffin's subcontractors, and gather information for this lawsuit. He produced photographs of Trent talking to the fake inspector, along with testimony from Mickey and other witnesses who had seen them together. Finally, Your Honor, we have recorded conversations between Mrs. Griffin and various third parties in which she discusses her plan to file false insurance claims and extract a settlement from my client. That was news to me. I hadn't known Liam had recorded conversations, but I kept my face neutral as he played a brief audio clip of Elise talking to someone about making that bastard pay for what he did to me. The courtroom was silent except for the sound of Elise's sharp intake of breath. Her lawyer looked like he was having a stroke. Judge Hendricks studied the evidence for several minutes, her expression growing darker with each document she reviewed. Mrs. Griffin, she said finally, I'm going to ask you some direct questions, and I want direct answers. Did you create Elite Consulting Services as a legitimate business, or as a prop to support this lawsuit? Elise's lawyer started to object, but she cut him off. It was going to be a real business. I was planning to develop clients. But you haven't developed any clients, have you? In fact, you haven't done any consulting work at all. Not yet, but, Mrs. Griffin, did you file a false police report claiming that your ex-husband was harassing you? I felt threatened. I was scared. That's not what I asked. Did the incidents you reported to the police actually occur? The silence stretched out for nearly a minute. Finally, Elise shook her head. No, not exactly. Judge Hendricks closed the folder and looked directly at Elise. Mrs. Griffin, I've been doing this job for 20 years, and I've seen a lot of ugly divorces, but I've rarely seen such a systematic attempt to defraud both the court system and an insurance company. She turned to Elise's lawyer. Counselor, I strongly suggest that you advise your client about the potential criminal implications of filing false police reports and fraudulent insurance claims. This court does not look kindly on perjury or abuse of process. Your Honor, the lawyer said weakly, perhaps we could withdraw the restraining order application and discuss a settlement. There will be no settlement, Judge Hendricks said firmly. The restraining order application is denied. Furthermore, I'm referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for investigation of possible criminal charges. She looked back at Elise, her expression somewhere between disgust and pity. Mrs. Griffin, you came into my courtroom today and lied under oath. You wasted valuable court time and resources on a fabricated case. You attempted to use the legal system as a weapon against your ex-husband. Your Honor, please, I'm not finished. You're fortunate that Mr. Griffin's attorney was able to expose your scheme before you succeeded in committing insurance fraud. But your luck ends here. If you file any more frivolous lawsuits, make any more false police reports, or engage in any further harassment of Mr. Griffin or his business, I will hold you in contempt of court, and you will go to jail. She banged her gavel with finality. This hearing is adjourned. As we left the courtroom, I could hear Elise crying behind us. Her lawyer was speaking in urgent whispers, probably explaining that she now faced potential criminal charges for perjury, filing false police reports, and attempted insurance fraud. That went better than expected, Liam said as we walked toward the parking garage. What happens now? Now they disappear. Elise is looking at serious jail time if the DA decides to prosecute, and Trent is facing charges for impersonating a state official. Their best option is to leave town and hope this all goes away. He was right. By the time we got back to my office, Mickey was waiting with news that Trent's car dealership had been closed and locked up by the bank. The foreclosure had been accelerated after news of his legal troubles reached his creditors. That evening, I was at home enjoying a quiet dinner when my doorbell rang one last time. Through the window, I could see Elise standing on my front porch, alone. She looked smaller somehow, diminished by the day's events. I opened the door, but didn't invite her in. "Grant," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I need to talk to you. I think you've said enough for one lifetime. Please, just 5 minutes." Against my better judgment, I stepped outside and closed the door behind me. What do you want, Elise? I want to apologize. Really apologize, not just say the words because I have to. She looked genuinely broken, her perfect facade finally cracked beyond repair. I know you don't believe me, but I never meant for it to go this far. I was angry and scared, and I made terrible decisions. You tried to destroy my life, I said simply. I know, and I'm sorry. I'm sorrier than you'll ever know. We stood there in silence for a moment, two people who had once loved each other, now separated by an ocean of betrayal and hurt. What happens now? She asked. Now you leave. You and Trent pack up whatever you can carry and you get out of town. You don't come back. You don't call. You don't send letters or emails or messages through mutual friends. You disappear completely. And if we do that, then I won't pursue criminal charges. I won't sue you for the money you stole or the damage you caused to my business. I'll let you start over somewhere else. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. Thank you. Don't thank me. I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing it because I want this to be over. She turned to leave, then stopped and looked back at me one last time. For what it's worth, Grant, you deserved better than what I gave you. Yes, I said. I did. I watched her walk away, her heels clicking against the sidewalk until she disappeared into the darkness. Then I went back inside my house, and poured myself a glass of that expensive whiskey. The next morning, Mrs. Kavanaugh called to let me know that a moving truck had been seen at Trent's apartment complex. By noon, Mickey reported that Elite Consulting Services had closed its doors and disappeared overnight. By evening, both Elise and Trent were gone, along with their schemes and their drama and their chaos. The town settled back into its normal rhythms, and life went on. 6 months later, I was having dinner at the same restaurant where this whole mess had started when the manager, Mr. Landry, stopped by my table. Mr. Griffin, he said, I hope you don't mind me saying, but you look like a man who's found his peace. I looked around the dining room at the other couples enjoying their meals, at the normal, uncomplicated lives unfolding around me. Then I raised my glass in a silent toast to the empty chair across from me. You know what, Mr. Landry? I think I have. And for the first time in years, I meant it completely.